Hilchos Maachalos Asuros Perek Shiva Asar. The Laws of Forbidden Foods, chapter 17. Today is the final chapter. We're going to be concluding this long set of laws. And the discussion today is a bunch of mini topics related specifically to Gentiles. So we're going to be talking about the laws of koshering non-kosher utensils, immersing non-kosher utensils, tfilas kelim. You'll see outside of Chabad we have a dish mikvah. People, you buy a new dish, you put it in the mikvah. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about what's called pas akum, bishul akum, bread baked by a Gentile, things cooked by a Gentile, and how we behave with those things. And the Rambam is going to conclude with the laws of consuming things that are just simply disgusting, loathsome to any human, and how the Jew should behave towards them. So we begin with the laws of koshering. It says the Rambam halacha aleph kedeira shel cheres. If you have a pottery or earthenware, a clay utensil, as the one pictured on the screen, shenizbashel ba besar nevela or besar shkatzim or remasim, in which was cooked meat of a nevela. Nevela means kosher meat that was slaughtered, that was not slaughtered in the proper way. So a cow died, let's say, you cooked the meat in there, or the meat of forbidden insects. Point is, some tray food was cooked in this pottery utensil. Says the Rambam lo yevashel ba basar shchuta ba'oisei hayom. You should not use this same pot to cook kosher slaughtered meat on the same day.
Even though cheres is bolea?
That's why. Because cheres is bolea, because earthenware absorbs. So we'll see about the one day in a second. The basic law is, because earthenware absorbs that which you cooked in it, so for 24 hours, the taste is going to be very present in the walls of the utensil. And if you're going to cook kosher meat in the pot, the absorptions from the non-kosher meat are going to come back into the pot, and they're going to make the whole meat non-kosher. So therefore, on the same day, you shouldn't cook any kosher meat in this pot. Bishal ba min basar, if you did cook any type of meat in the pot, hatavshil osir. The whole cooked dish is forbidden. Why? Because there'll be no way to tell whether or not the taste of the non-kosher meat is present in the meat. It's meat and meat. What we called in these last two chapters, min b'mino. It's a mixture of the same type. And therefore the whole dish is forbidden. Bishel b'min acher, if you cooked another type of food in the pot, so now all we have to worry about is that there may be discernible taste of non-kosher meat in this food, b'noisin tam. Then we follow the regular rules that the Rambam delineated for what's called min b'she'enei minoi, a mixture of different types in which you have to check if you can discern the taste of the non-kosher food in the kosher food by having a Gentile taste the food. And the Rambam told us yesterday, the other day as well, that he will tell us if he tastes the non-kosher food. Now, this concept of the 1 day wait, says the Rambam, v'lei asra Torah ela kedeira bas yoima bilvat. The Torah biblically only prohibited a pot in its day. In its day, there's some debate as to what this means, whether it means till sunset of that day, but the commonly accepted interpretation in Shulchan Aruch for sure is 24 hours. So the Torah only forbids using the pot in 24 hours. Hoyil va'adayin le'nifgam hashuman shenivla b'kedeira. Because the fats or the taste of the meat that's been swallowed, that's been absorbed into the pot, has not become impaired. According to Jewish law, after 24 hours, any taste remaining in the pot becomes lesser quality and will not enhance any further food cooked in it. It's only going to impair it. But that's only biblically. According to the rabbis, when it comes to cheres, when it comes to pottery, earthenware, they said once earthenware absorbs non-kosher food, it will never be able to fully be released. And therefore you should never cook in it ever again. Lefichach, therefore, ein loikchin kli cheres yeshanim min ha'ivdei kechavim. You cannot buy any old earthenware utensils from a Gentile shenishtamshu behen bechamin, which was used for hot non-kosher food. Kegain kederes ukaires, like pots and bowls, lo'elam. Ever. You can never buy an earthenware utensil owned by a non-Jew. Va'afilu hayushuin ba'avar, even if they were coated or glazed with lead, in which case it would be smoother and maybe not so absorbent, doesn't matter. Any earthenware utensil is out of the game. But if you didn't listen to the rabbis and you bought such a utensil from a gut and you cooked in it, as long as it passed 24 hours, whatever you cooked in it, according to the Rambam, is permitted. Now, that is all for earthenware utensils. Halacha Gimel, now we move on to other materials. Halakeach klei tashmish suda min ha'eved kechavim. If you buy any utensils that are used in a meal from a Gentile, miklei matches uklei schuchis. But this time it's not earthenware, it's metal or glass. So metal or glass has a different rule. Dvarim shaloi nishtamish bahen kol ikar. If it was utensils that the non-Jew never ever used at all, he simply owned them. He bought them from Target, and now you're going and buying them from him. Matbilan b'mei mikveh. So what you have to do is, this is called a dish mikveh. You have to dip them in a mikveh. And only afterwards will it be permitted right away to eat or drink with these utensils, because they were never ever used by the Gentile. But if the utensils which you bought were things that the guy himself used, but only for cold foods or cold liquids, like cups and jugs and jars, midichan, first you have to wash them before the mikveh. You wash them off, just wash them thoroughly to make sure whatever residue might be on them is off. You wash them, umat bilan, and then you dip them in the mikveh. Vehein mutares, and then they're permitted. So again, if you haven't used them, just the mikveh. If you use them for cold, washing and a mikveh. But things that the non-Jew may have used with hot foods or hot liquids, like large pots and kettles and pots that are used to heat up water. Here you need not to wash, but mag'ilan. You have to do what's called hag'ala. Hag'ala, that Rambam will soon define in a moment, is to place the dish, it's on the left side here, to place the dish into boiling hot water. And then you put them in the mikveh. Mag'ilan umat bilan, you have to do hag'ala, kosher them with hot water, and immerse them in a mikveh. Vehein mutardin, and then they are permitted.
Not agala, agala אני מבין, אבל...
What's on the right?
No. If you buy a new one, you put them in the mikveh. For what?
Oh, we'll see. Very good. We'll see. Udvardim shenishtamish bahen al yedei ha'ur. But what about the next level things? Things that were not just used for hot foods. They were used directly over open fire. Kagan shvudin v'askelois, like spits and grills. So these, because they were exposed to fire while cooking non-kosher, they have to be exposed to fire in the process of koshering them. Milabnon ba'ur. You have to make them white hot in fire. Acha tinosher klipasan, until the outer layer falls off. Umatbilan vehin mutarin. Then you put them in the mikveh, and then they are permitted. Okay, so we have basically 4 levels. Totally new stuff, put them in the mikveh. Old stuff that were used for cold, wash in the mikveh. Old stuff that were used for hot, hag'ala, hot water in the mikveh. Old stuff that were used over fire, fire in the mikveh. Says the Rambam, Ketzad Mag'ilan. What exactly is the process of hag'ala, of putting them in hot water? By the way, the word Mag'il literally means to have them exude all the absorptions. Noisin yaira ketana, l'soich yaira gedayla. You put a small pot, that's the pot that you want to make it kosher, into a bigger pot. Umemale aleha mayim ad sheyotzufa ala ketana. Fill up the big pot with water till it overflows over the small pot. Umarticha yafe yafe, and you boil up the pot very thoroughly. And that's it. But if the pot that you want to kosher was itself a large pot, you don't have a larger pot to put it in. So what do you do now? Makif al sfasa batzek oitit. You line the edge, the mouth of the pot, with some dough or some clay or mud. So fill the large pot with water all the way up to the edge and over the edge into this layer of added dough or mud. Umartiach, and you simply heat it up. In other words, in this case, you don't have to worry about the outside of the walls. As long as the inside of the walls, up to and including the edge, are covered in boiling water, you're good. The kulan, any goyish utensil, any Gentile utensil, whatever category it was, shenishtamish bohen ad shaloi hirtiach. If you would have used them before heating them up with water, or ad shaloi hidiach, or before washing them in the case of cold foods, ad shaloi hilbin, or before you expose them to white hot fire. Before you put them in the mikvah, mutter. According to the Rambam, after the fact, if you use them for kosher food before doing this koshering process, it's all permitted. Because any absorptions, any fatty absorptions in the pots would be considered to be impaired taste, negative taste. As we just explained, after 24 hours, the taste becomes impaired. Now, the Rambam is super lenient in this area. In Shulchan Aruch, of course, we're more stringent. Stay away from non-koshered pots and pans and all that stuff. And really, don't be cooking any kosher food in it until you do what has to be done. Put it in the mikveh or kosher. Halacha hey. What is the point of this immersion of utensils? Says the Rambam, Tvila zu shematbilin klei asuda hanilkachin min ha'ivdei kechavim. This immersion which we do, that we immerse any meal utensils that we buy from the non-Jews. And only then they become permitted for eating and drinking. So what is the purpose of this immersion? Says the Rambam, first of all, you should know what the purpose is not. Einon le'inyan tuma v'tara. It has nothing to do with ritual purity or impurity. Even though we are going to see in the 10th book of the Rambam that non-Jews are assumed to have a certain status of ritual impurity, that's not the reason why we're immersing the utensils to get rid of that impurity. Ela midivrei seifrim. Rather, it's a rabbinic enactment, and the Rambam doesn't clearly say what the rabbinic enactment is. In the Jerusalem Talmud and the Yerushalmi says that it's an issue of holiness. Sheyatzu mireshut nochri likdushat Yisrael. They're leaving the possession of a Gentile into the holiness of the Jewish possession, and so we want to immerse it in the mikveh. That's the classic interpretation, but we'll see in a second something from the Rebbe a little different on this. But bottom line, it's rabbinic. V'remez la. What's the hint? The sages found the hint for this in the Torah. And this is a verse in the end of the book of Bamidbar, when the Jewish people fought a war with Midian. When they fought a war with Midian, they came back with lots of spoils. And this is the first time where Hashem introduced the laws of koshering utensils. And what does he say? Kol davar asher yavei va'esh, ta'aviru va'esh v'taher. Anything, any utensil which came into contact with fire, you should pass through fire and make it pure. Now, that's the basic principle of whatever level, whatever degree of non-kosher it was exposed to, that's the degree you have to expose to make it kosher. Now, what was he telling them in this case? We learn from tradition, this passing through fire was about taking these utensils out of the category of being non-kosher. It wasn't about ritual impurity. How do we know it's not about ritual impurity? Learn the whole 10th book of the Rambam, where all the laws of purity and impurity are discussed. There's no such thing as leaving impurity through fire. Every single type of impure person only leaves his impurity through going to the mikveh. Corpse impurity is even more. You have to be sprinkled with the ashes of the para aduma, the red heifer, and go to the mikveh. The ein sham eish klal, but there's no fire at all. So if the Torah here is telling the Jewish people to pass the utensils through fire, it's obviously talking about ela le'inyan gi'ulei avdei kechavim. It's talking about taking them out of the absorptions of the Gentiles. Now, once we establish that, take a look at the verse. Why does it say this word v'taher? V'taher implies a ritual purity. If you just told me that I'm putting it through fire, not for ritual purity, I'm putting it through fire for extracting these absorptions, why does it say v'taher? Says the Rambam, B'kevan shekasu v'taher. Since after passing through fire, the Torah says v'taher, the sages learned that, you know what this is? It's not one long sentence. This is not ta'aviru va'esh v'taher. Put it in the fire and then it will become pure. It's two instructions. Ta'aviru ba'esh, put it through the fire. That takes care of the absorptions of the non-Jewish foods. V'taher, and also, in addition to that, put it through a process of purity. Amru Chachamim, the sages said, Hoisif le'tahara, add to it another layer of purity. Achar avirase ba'esh, after passing it through the fire, lehatire migiulei v'kechavim, to permit it from the absorptions of the Gentiles. Now, these last four words become a big debate in the commentaries. Where do these last four words continue to? Is the Rambam saying Achar avirasai ba'esh lahatire migiulei v'kechavim. After passing it through fire, which the fire took care of the absorptions. And now, this immersion is for a different purpose, as I said before, because it's going from a Gentile property to a Jewish property. That's the classic interpretation. The Lechem Mishnah learns that way. But the Rebbe notes that if you look in the Rambam's other commentary on the Mishnah, it sounds like he's actually saying over here that the immersion is also connected to the absorption of the non-Jewish food. In other words, Hoisif leitahara achar avirasei ba'esh, comma, add a purity after passing it through fire, and this purity of immersion is also with the same purpose, lehatirei migiulei dekechavim, to also permit it from non-Jewish absorptions, which causes a little bit of a problem, because what does that mean? If you put it through fire, you've already taken away all the absorptions. What more is there to do with the water? So some commentaries say that it's an extra wash. It's an extra step to take away even more residue. But the Rebbe has a fascinating talk where he says that there's something about the mikvah which is not about removing actual absorptions. All the food that was absorbed came away through the fire. The immersion is about almost purifying, this is the words he uses, purifying the utensil from even a connection to prohibited foods. So long as a pot was in a non-Jewish possession, even if it was never used to actually make a barbecue or whatever, the very fact that it was a non-Jewish possession means that it could become non-kosher. Since it was able to become non-kosher, it needs purification. When the Jew puts it in the mikveh, what you do is you're putting it into a Jewish possession in such a way that it's never going to become non-kosher.
It's really beautiful.
Yes, it's literally transferring it's like a new ownership in a way.
So like ruch, something ruch.
Yes, it's like a spiritual, but related to the giulei.
Practical thing.
Yes, related to the concept of the non-Jewish absorptions. The fire takes the actual ones out. The water removes the possibility of ever being related to prohibition, even in potential. Which, by the way, that explains why you have to immerse even a new vessel. We said before, even if you didn't use it at all, you have to put it in the mikveh. Because it was even just for a second related to non-Jewish possession, it already requires this purification. Now, halacha vav, lo yichivu b'tvila zu, the sages did not obligate a person to do this immersion, ela klei matches, shel seuda, hainel kachim and ayev dekechavim. It has to meet all the criteria. It has to be metal, used for a meal, only stuff used for a meal, and bought from a non-Jew. Aval hashoyel min ayev dekechavim, but if you only borrow a utensil from a non-Jew, or the non-Jew deposited by you some utensils as collateral, you gave him a loan and he gave you collateral, his pots and pans, all you have to do is to wash it off if it was used for cold, or heat it in hot water if it was used for hot, or make it white hot in the fire if it was used over fire, and no need to put it in the mikveh. And in light of the explanation I gave before, it makes a lot of sense. When you borrow something or it's only collateral, you don't own it. It's still in the possession of the guy. That transfer to Jewish possession, which has no possibility for prohibition, doesn't exist yet. So yes, you have to wash it or kasher it to take away the actual absorptions, but the extra step of immersion is not required. Same thing if you bought wooden utensils or stone utensils, simply wash it or heat it up, no need for the immersion. Klei charasim is what it should say here, or klei cheres chadashim, some texts have. Pottery utensils that are new, no need to do the immersion on the pottery utensils. But if they're glazed with lead, they are like metal, and they have to be dipped in the mikveh. Halacha zayin. Halikeach sakin mina oived kechavim. If you buy a knife from a Gentile, milabna ba'esh, you must heat it up white hot with fire to kosher it, or sharpen it fully on its sharpener. Because when you sharpen it, essentially what's happening is you're removing a layer off of the metal. So that's like it's equivalent to the accomplishment of koshering, which removes also the outer surface. If it was a very smooth knife, doesn't have any bumps, it's enough if you simply stick it into tough earth 10 times, 10 different areas, not the same place 10 times. And then you can eat cold kosher food with it. But if there were bumps in it, or it was a smooth knife, but you wanted to use it for hot foods, or lishchet bar, to use it to slaughter, you must heat it white hot, or at least sharpen it. Shachad ba koydem sheyetaharena. If you used it to slaughter before you koshered it, mediach mekay mashchita, simply wash off the area of the slaughtered animal, and it's kosher. V'im kolaf harezeh meshubach. If you peeled off the outer layer of the meat, that's even more praiseworthy. Halacha ches, sakin sheshachad ba treifa. If you use the knife to slaughter a treifa, a mortally wounded animal, lo yishchet ba ad sheyedicha afilu b'tzayin. You should not slaughter it with it again until you wash it, even if it's cold water. Or clean it off with some clothing, some worn out clothing. Yeah, so in Shulchan Aruch, the Taz writes that it's because when you're dealing with a non-kosher knife, the assumption is it was used for non-kosher things multiple times over. So in those multiple times over, some forbidden stuff was absorbed into the knife. But here you used it for a treifa, that means it was probably a kosher knife. It was used in a one-off instance for a wrong animal, so it didn't have a chance to absorb that much. So you simply just wash it off or clean it off and you're good. Halacha tes. V'yesham dvarim acherim asru oisan chachamim. There are other things that the sages forbade. V'afal pi she'ein li'isuran ikar min ha'Torah. Even though there's no source for this prohibition in the Torah. It was simply a safeguard. Gazru aleyan kedei lihisrachek min ha'ibdekechavim. The sages decreed on these things just to help us keep our distance from the idol-worshipping Gentiles, to avoid Jews mixing with them and intermarrying with them. The Eluhain, and they are the following. Asru lishtais imahen, you cannot have a drink with them. Even if there's no worry about forbidden wine, it's a bar, there's only whiskey there, and mashke, and alcohol. You can't have a drink with them. Also, the asru lechel piton, it's forbidden to eat their bread, oy bishulehen, or their cooked foods. We'll soon define these in detail. Even if there's no reason to suspect that there's a non-Jewish absorption. They're making food in a totally new pot. They're making kosher food. But they cooked it, they baked it, forbidden.
It says here also if they did it in a Jewish house. Like you weren't there.
Did it in a Jewish house. We'll talk about that also. Exactly. So now let's go through each one of these. Drinking, bread, and cooking. Ketzat. What does this mean? A person should not have a drink at a party of idol-worshipping Gentiles. Even if it's mevushal wine, it doesn't become prohibited. Or you're eating from you brought your kosher cup to the party, and you're drinking only from there. No, it's forbidden. If most of the party was Jewish, mutter, then it's permitted. It's not called drinking at a non-Jewish party because most of the party is Jews. You also cannot drink non-Jewish beer that was produced from dates or figs or anything like it. Even though there's no wine involved, still, it's a staying away from drinks of Gentiles. However, this is only forbidden in the place of sale. You go to the beer brewery where they're making it, there to drink it, it's forbidden. But if you were to bring such beer to your house and drink it there, bottom line is it's kosher beer. So mutter, it's permitted. The whole decree was to avoid having a meal with the guy. Here, that's what you're avoiding it. You're taking it to your house and having a drink on your own.
Yeah, but your own farbringen.
Your own little farbringen. Apple cider, essentially. Wine from apples. Pomegranate wine. It's like pomegranate juice. And things like that. These can be drunk in any place, even at a non-Jewish party. This is a basic rule. The sages never decreed on uncommon cases. This was very inaccessible, this type of juices. So they weren't worried about it. Yein simukin, raisin wine, not only is it forbidden, harehu kiyayin umisnasech. It's literally like wine. It could even become biblically forbidden. So stay away from raisin wine. Now, let's turn to pas akum. Pas akum means bread baked by a Gentile. Says the Rambam, there's two categories in non-Jewish bread. These are called in Shulchan Aruch pas balabayis, homeowner's bread, and pas palter, baker's bread. So if you think about it, the whole decree was instituted to avoid interpersonal interactions. So there's more of a reason to be lenient when it comes to baker's bread, because the baker is more of he's a store. You don't come in to have a party there. So you go in, you buy your stuff, and you're out. So the Rambam says, even though the sages forbade us to have bread baked by Gentiles, yesh mekaymes shemekilin badavar. There are some communities, some places where they're lenient. Pas and they will buy bread from a non-Jewish baker, b'makim she'ein sham nachtam Yisrael ubasada, assuming that there's no Jewish baker around. Okay, big caveat there. And it has to be also out there in the field, not in a regular populated city. Because it's a extenuating circumstance. Aval pas balabatim, but homeowner's bread, ein sham mi shamayda balahakal. There's nobody who rules leniently on that. That's literally the decree. She'ikar agzeira mishum chasnos. The whole decree was made to avoid intermarriage. V'im yeichal pas balabatim, yavai lisaid etzlan. If you're going to eat homeowner's bread, you are going to come to have dinner with them. That's going to happen. So no room for leniencies over there, but paspalter, baker's bread, there is some room for leniency. By the way, this is the halacha where we see Shulchan Aruch talks about it in Asuros Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of Tshuva between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that Jews keep mitzvahs on a stricter level. The example Shulchan Aruch gives is that during those 10 days, even Jews who are not always careful with buying baker's non-Jewish bread, during those 10 days, they won't even buy that. Because it's a special time, you want to behave even better, you'll avoid totally non-Jewish bread and only go for what's called Pas Yisrael, kosher Jewish bread. Halacha Yud Gimel. What makes it non-kosher bread or kosher bread? Hidli ka'evet kechavim esatanur. If an idol-worshipping Gentile lit the oven, va'afa ba Yisrael, and then the Jew baked the bread. Hidlik Yisrael va'afa evet kechavim. Or the Jew lit the fire and the non-Jew baked the bread. Hidlik ka'evet kechavim va'afa ha'evet kechavim. Or the non-Jew did the lighting and the baking. Uba Yisrael v'nir ha'esh ma'at. But the Jew came and stoked the fire a little bit. Kav shela esh, or controlled the fire. Hoyel v'nishtatev b'mlechas hapas, according to the Rambam, as long as the Jew partnered in some way in the bread making process, harezu muteres, the whole bread is permitted, kosher bread. Today we more rule that it has to be the beginning. So that's why the mashgiach will always come in and light the fires. But in the end of the day, if all you ended up doing was just throwing in a piece of wood or something like that, there's also more room to be lenient. Here it is. Even if all you did was throw a piece of wood into the fire, that act of throwing permits all the bread. The only thing that's required is some kind of distinguishing factor to show that non-Jewish bread is forbidden. So as long as you do something to show that I'm a Jewish, I'm having some Jewish involvement, it's already okay. That's as far as pas akum, the non-Jewish bread. Let's move now on to bishul akum, food cooked by a Gentile. Says the Rambam, if an idol-worshipping Gentile cooked for us, for a Jew, yayin, ay chalav, ay dvash, ay prishin, wine or milk, or honey, or a quince, anything like these, in which it's something which could be eaten or is usually eaten raw. You don't need to cook wine or milk to drink it. You don't need to cook honey or a quince to drink it. But he did. That's permitted. The sages only decreed on things that are not usually eaten as they are raw. Going basar, the dog tafel, ubeitza v'yirakos, like meat, unsalted fish, eggs or vegetables. In bishlan ha'ivit kechavim midchila v'ad soif. If the idol-worshipping Gentile cooked them from beginning to the end, again like the bread, and the Jew didn't partner at all with the cooking process, they are forbidden on account of being cooked by a Gentile. However, huge caveat, when is the whole rule of bishul akum stated? If it's a thing, a food item that would be served on a king's table to be eaten together with bread. Or today, as the commentaries say, some dignified meal. We don't have kings today, but you would serve it at a president's dinner, something fancy. Again, those examples, meat, eggs, and fish. But in food item which would not be served on a king's table to be eaten together with bread, like a very rough bean, which were boiled by Gentiles, even though they fit into the first category. They're not eaten raw, they are permitted because they wouldn't be served at a dignified meal. Same thing for anything similar. Why? Follow the reason. She'ikar agzeira mishum chasnos. The whole decree was put in place for intermarriage. Shaloi yizamnei oived kechavim etzle b'seuda, to avoid a Gentile inviting a Jew for a meal. V'davar she'enei oile al shulchan malachim lechal be'es pas. But a food item which is not going to be served at a dignified meal, at a king's table to eat bread with, ein adam mizamin es chaveri alav. Nobody would invite a friend over either to serve that. So therefore, we're not worried that the Gentile, if he cooks such food, it's permitted. The dagim ketanim shemalchan yisrael oived kechavim. Small fish that were salted by a Jew or a Gentile. This salting is considered to be a partial cooking. If a non-Jew roasted them afterwards, it's permitted. The same principle as baking. Anything that a Jew cooked, even part of the cooking, whether in the beginning or in the end, it's all permitted. Therefore, a Gentile places some meat or a pot over a fire. The Jew flips the burger, or he stirs the pot. Or the opposite. The Jew put the meat on the fire. The Jew put the pot on the fire. And the Gentile finished the process. It's all permitted. If there was a fish that was salted by a non-Jew, or fruits that he smoked, he salted them or he smoked them so much that it doesn't require any more cooking. Now it's ready to eat. It's permitted. Even though we saw earlier in these laws that salted food has a status of hot food, in this case, we don't consider salted food to be hot, to be boiling. We also don't consider smoke to be cooked. Let's say when it came to meat and milk, smoking was like cooking. But here, for a goyish cooking, it's not considered to be like cooking. So if a goy makes smoked salmon, it's fine, according to the Rambam. Also toasted grain made by Gentiles. And it's permitted, no decree. Because no person would invite a friend over just to have toasted grain. Which, by the way, raises questions in today's society when people do. You would invite a friend over just for popcorn. You would invite a friend over just for some chips and salsa. So there is room to be more stringent, because if that's the guiding principle, if we go by what people would invite for, then people will invite for much crazier stuff today. Some say no, some say we still have to go, by a certain standard, but this is the basic bottom line. Yudches, pailin, va'afunin, va'adashim. Types of beans. Pailin is a lima bean, afunin is a pea, adashim is lentil, v'chayetze behen, and the like. The non-Jews boil them and then sell them. Asurin mishum bishuli of the kechavim b'makayim sha'ilin al shulchan malachim mishum parperes. They are forbidden on account of non-Jewish cooked foods if it's a place where they would be served at a dignified meal as an appetizer. Umishum gi'ulei of the kechavim b'chol makayim. But they are forbidden because of what's called non-Jewish absorptions in every place. Shema yevashlu oisanim habasar b'kdeira shabishlu babasar, because they might have been cooked with meat in a pot, or in a pot that meat was cooked in. In other words, even if the beans themselves are permitted on account of non-Jewish cooking, they always carry the suspicion that maybe they were cooked together with non-kosher meat and have the absorptions of non-kosher food in them. Also donuts that non-Jews make when they fry them in oil, asurin af mishum gi'ulei of the kechavim, are also forbidden because of prohibited goyish foods, because they may have absorbed non-kosher fat, or the fryer that they were using was a non-kosher frying pan, etc. Yutes oivet kechavim shabishel v'lei niskaven lebishel. A non-Jew cooks, but he doesn't mean to cook. Harei muter. This is permitted. I found this case pretty funny. Ketzat. What does this look like? Give me an example of cooking with no intent. Oivet kechavim shehetzis ur ba'agam. A Gentile sets fire to a swamp to remove overgrowth. There's too much grass, and he's firing up his grass. The fire goes down. Oh, there's some roast locusts. Locusts could be kosher. Some roast kosher locusts in the swamp.
Can you identify that when it's burnt?
Yeah, let's say it was still identifiable. Harelu mutarin. The Rambam says they're permitted because he didn't mean to cook them. Even if it's in a place where the locusts would be served at a king's meal as an appetizer, no problem. Same thing if a non-Jew is scalding or he's scorching a head of an animal to remove its hair. Mutter lechal min hadildulin, you can eat any strings of meat that are attached and got cooked with it. Umin reishas nayim shenitzlu b'shas charicha, or the edges of the ears that got grilled with the singeing, because the guy didn't intend for cooking. He wanted to remove the hair. Halacha chaf. Tmarim sheshel kois on evde kechavim. Dates that were boiled by non-Jews. Im hayu mesukin mitchilasan, if they were sweet to begin with, hareelu mutarin, they are permitted, because they could be eaten raw, and the whole decree doesn't apply to things that can be eaten raw. Im hayu marin umesakin anabishol, but if they were bitter and the cooking sweetens them, hareelu asurin, they are forbidden, because they couldn't have been eaten raw. Hayu beinarim, if they were average in between, hareelu asurin, we go stringently, and they are forbidden. Chaf Aleph, Kali Shaladashim, roasted lentils. Shalashay bein b'mayim bein b'chemetz, that were kneaded into water or vinegar. Hareza asr, that's forbidden. It's like a cooking process. Right, so the Gemara says that this vinegar lentil mixture was considered to be a fancy mixture. They looked at it like cooking, and because of vinegar, they decreed also on water. Aval Kali Shal Chitim Musa'erim, Shalashay Nesan b'mayim, but roasted wheat kernels or barley corns that were kneaded in water, Hareza mutter, that's permitted. Chav Beis Shemen Shal Evdei Kechavim, oil of Gentiles, mutter, it's permitted. Umisha Oistrai, any rabbi who forbids it, Hareza Oymed B'chet Gadol, stands in great sin. He's rebelling against the court that permitted it. And even if the oil was cooked, Hareza mutter, it's permitted. The Einei Nesar, and it's not forbidden on any account. It's not forbidden because of the cooking of the Gentiles, because it could be eaten as it is raw. And not for forbidden non-kosher foods, because even if you cook the oil in a pot that had meat, non-kosher meat absorptions, meat flavor will ruin oil and make it smell bad. So therefore, as we had in the principles, tam lifgam, bad taste, doesn't make things non-kosher. Honey of a Gentile which was cooked, to make some kind of candy, mutter mitam zeh, permitted for the same reason. No problem to cook it, because it could be eaten raw. No problem of non-Jewish, non-kosher absorptions, because even if there is, it's bad taste. Chavdalid kuspan, shal evde kechavim. Kuspan is date sediment, date dregs. Shmarim shal tmarim. Shahucha muchamin, that were heated with hot water. Bein b'yayra gedayla, bein b'yayra katana, whether in a big or small pot. Mutter, it's permitted. Any taste that would be transferred would be bad taste. V'chein kvashin, also pickled foods. She'ein darkan lasis l'seichan chaymetz hayayin, into which you should not add, usually, vinegar or wine. Oizesim akvushim v'chagavim akvushim shebayim min ha'eitzar, or pickled olives, pickled locusts, that come from a storehouse. Mutar, and they're permitted. Aval chagavim ukvashim shemizalfin alein yayin, but any locust or pickled food that the custom was to sprinkle wine on them, asurin, they are forbidden because of the wine. V'cheinim hayim mizalfin alein chaymetz, v'afilu chaymetz sheichar, asurin. Also, if they would sprinkle vinegar on them, even if it's beer vinegar, it's still forbidden. Safeguard. What's the problem with beer vinegar that the sages forbade it? Apparently, in the beer made from vinegar, they would still throw in some wine dregs, some wine sediment. Therefore, it's like sediment, like leftover at the bottom of a barrel of wine. You have this leftover pieces, so they're still winey. But if you buy it from a storehouse, then it's permitted, because over there's not going to be any wine dregs, because the one that are in the storehouse, it would spoil if they had too much wine dregs in it. So we can say that it's probably pure beer vinegar and it's permitted. Chavav hamurias, fish brine, made by Gentiles. B'makim shedarkan lasis l'seicha yayin. If the custom was to put wine in it, of course, usher, it's forbidden. But if wine was more expensive than fish brine, mutter, it's permitted, because they would not pour wine into fish brine. The kazem moedin, the same ruling applies. B'chol davar shecheshishin lai. Shema ervu b'yayiv dekechavim davar aser. In any food item where there's room to suspect that maybe the Gentiles mixed in something forbidden, same thing applies. If the forbidden thing is more expensive, we don't worry about it. Nobody will mix in expensive things into cheap things, because he's causing himself loss. But he would mix in cheap things into expensive things to make some money. A very major general rule when it comes to non-kosher foods. Katan. If you have a child, Maachalos Asuros, he ate a ham sandwich. He ate something forbidden. Or he did work on Shabbat. Ein bezdin mitzuvin alav lahafrishay. The court doesn't have the commandment to stop him. Because he isn't considered by Torah standards mature. When do we say you don't have a responsibility? If he's doing it on his own. But you can't go and feed him non-kosher food with your hands. Even things that are only forbidden rabbinically. You cannot actively get him used to or her used to desecrating Shabbat on holidays. Even things that are only forbidden rabbinically. Afal P says the Rambam, even though she'ein bezdin mitzuvin lehafrish asakatan, yes, it's true, the court doesn't have the obligation to stop the child. Mitzvah al aviv ligar boyo lehafrishay. A father does have a mitzvah to scream at him and to stop him, kedei lechanchei b'kedusha, to educate him in the holy path. Shenemar, as it says, chanoich lanar al pi darkei v'gomer. Shlomo HaMelech says you must educate a child according to his way. Now the Rebbe points out that the Rambam over here doesn't write lechancho b'mitzvot, to educate him in mitzvahs, which is the usual terminology that he uses when it comes to all other mitzvahs about educating, about the father's obligation to education. Because here we're talking about stopping from prohibition. There's an active mitzvah to educate a child how to do mitzvahs, and there's a different type of commandment to stop him from doing negative things. The obligation to stop him from doing negative things is not a detail in the commandment to educate him on mitzvahs. It's a general principle that a Jewish father should make sure that his kid grows up b'kedusha, in a holy setting, which includes avoiding negative acts. And therefore the Rambam brings this word here, because when it's talking about stopping a kid from doing negative things, it's about lechanchei b'kedusha, educating him in holiness. And the final subject in this chapter, says the Rambam, is things that humans would anyways stay away from. Asru chachamim. The sages forbade Maachalos umashkin, to eat food or drinks, shenefesh roiv b'nei adam kehamehen, from which most people's souls are loathsome, distant from them. Kegoin Maachalos umashkin shenisariv bahen ki oitzoya, like liquid or foods into which vomit or waste was mixed in. V'leichastrucha v'chayetze bahen, or foul discharges. V'chein asru chachamim lechol v'lishtais b'kelim hatzoyim. Sages also forbade to eat in dirty utensils, from which a person's soul would be, again, distant. Like a chamber pot, a bowl used in a toilet, or the barber's glass utensils, which they would use to let blood. I guess the barber also had a second job of letting blood. He would use this utensil. Anything like that, basically like a syringe. You wouldn't drink out of a syringe. You also cannot eat with dirty hands, or over unclean, dirty utensils. All of these things are included in the general prohibition, which says, do not abominate your souls. It's disgusting. Don't do it. A person eats these foods, he's going to get rabbinic lashes. Even though it's not related to non-kosher foods, but it has to do with this verse, says the Rambam, it's forbidden for a person to delay his bodily needs. You have to go to the bathroom, go right away. Whether solid waste, liquid waste. Of anybody who delays his bodily needs, he's included in this prohibition of making his soul abominant. More than the simple scientific result, which is you're going to bring upon yourself sickness if you keep on holding in your bodily needs. And you're also liable to your soul. Rather, it's proper to train yourself at specific times to go to the bathroom, so you won't have to distance yourself from people. Back in the time, they only had outhouses, so going to the bathroom meant taking a trip. You don't want to become distant from people, so you train yourself in the morning, in the evening, go to the bathroom, and this way you won't have to end up having your soul become disgusting. Now, the way the Rebbe explains the following halacha, the final halacha, is that the Rambam is bothered by a question. If anyway people stay away from this, we don't need the sages to tell us not to eat food that has vomit in it, right? So what's the point of making a prohibition about it? What's the point of making a special isur? And the answer the Rebbe says in short, it's a long talk that he delivered, but he explains that that's exactly what the Torah wants from us. The Torah wants us to reach a level where we're not staying away from things just because it's natural. We stay away from things because Hashem told us, because the sages told us. And therefore, says the Rambam, V'chol hanizar b'dvarim elu. Anybody who's careful in these things, and not careful in these things because you're careful as a human being. You're careful in these things, the ones that the sages made a big deal out of. Mevi kedusha v'tara yeseda l'nafshay. You will bring holiness and extra purity onto your soul. And that actually has to be your intent. You're supposed to be intending, I'm doing this to make my soul more proper and more holy. U'memarek nafshay l'shem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you clean out your soul, making it completely for the intent of God. In other words, the Rebbe explains the same theme. When you do it this way, you're essentially showing that you have no other agenda other than serving God. If you stayed away from throw up or this kind of stuff, just because it's human, so beautiful, you're a regular human being. But if you do it because Hashem said so, that means you're taking away all personal agendas. You're only doing that which Hashem wants. Shenemar, as it says, and this fits with the verse, V'hiskadishtem v'yisem kedoshim. You should make yourselves holy and be holy. There's actually 3 verses where this combination is, Ki kadesh ani, because I am holy. This is the verse that the Rambam is probably quoting, where all 6 words appear straight. But there are 2 other words. Here is just the first 3 words. Here are the last 3 words. Later on in the 10th book of the Rambam brings this whole verse. Ki kadesh ani Hashem mekadishchem. Here the Rambam brings only this one, which ends with Ki kadesh ani, for the same reason. Ani Hashem mekadishchem means I am making you holy. There's an element of selfishness included in it. But here, when you're holy just because God is holy, it's the same theme. You put yourself on the side, and you're only there doing what Hashem wants. And that's the highest level in all issues related to non-kosher food and consumption. We don't stay away from what we stay away from because it's healthy or not healthy. We stay away from it because that's what Hashem told us, and that's how we become holy people. Blessed is the merciful and grant us assistance. Mazal tov for concluding the laws of forbidden foods.